energy is everything. For me, energy management, not time management, is the key to productivity. The biggest challenge for businesses is how your teams work together.
So you very much lead from the front.
You cannot lead others effectively unless you are powerfully leading yourself first. If the company's culture is toxic, then guess what? You're going to fear making mistakes because it doesn't feel safe being in that company. Whereas if the culture is one of growth, empowerment, we're in this together, then guess what? Whatever happens, you know you can all pull together as a team.
Once you've got a strong culture, a few bad eggs, the culture will point it out and say, we're having trouble with these people.
And this is why a company's hiring process is so important.
Any top tips?
Any final top tips for entrepreneurs? I would say
We talk now to energy management specialist Simon Alexander Ong, not about heat pumps, solar panels, or the national grid, but how optimizing your own energy levels are the key to personal and professional success. Simon lays out how energy management, not time management, is the key to personal productivity, that laying out and sticking to a system for living is far more important than laying out individual goals, and why nursery children will beat CEOs and MBA graduates at an innovation task every time. And no one likes MBA graduates anyway, do they? We also chat about how the Force in Star Wars really isn't that far off the mark for both spiritual and physical energy. And surprisingly for us, the value of spending more time with the kids. So is this all just some new age woo-woo, or does it have real value to people and businesses? The likes of Unilever and Adobe are paying Simon, so clearly they think so. Time to make your own mind up. But before we get started, I just wanted to say a big thank you to everyone who's watching, liking, subscribing here on lovely YouTube. We've got more and more viewers tuning in each week, which is a delight to see. And you lot are really firing up the comments section, so please do keep it coming. I want to send some shout outs to Dave's channel 1491, who really enjoyed episode with Gary Stevenson, or Nova Too Young, who says, I love this channel, it's illuminating. And Anna6259, who really enjoyed the episode with Andrew Craig, which is definitely one of my favorites, top man he is. Please do keep the comments coming and do let us know if any suggestions you might have, guests you'd like to see on the show, or topics you'd like to discuss, or you just generally want to talk bollocks. Right, that's it. Get stuck in. Simon is an award-winning life coach and speaker known for his holistic approach to energy management, encompassing the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual aspects of well-being. He believes that by mastering energy management, people can gain the tools to optimize their energy levels, transform both their personal and professional lives. Simon's work has earned him the recognition from Sky News and BBC. He's worked with major brands like Unilever, Barclays, and Adobe. And beyond his coaching, Simon is also a celebrated author. His debut book, Energize, won Book of the Year in the Wellness, Wellbeing category at the Business Book Awards 2022. Simon, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on, Andy.
It's all about energy then. That's a good place to start, you think?
Indeed, energy is everything. For me, energy management, not time management, is the key to productivity.
Okay. Why did this thought occur to you? Like, did you have some experience when you lost energy, or?
Yeah, so my background wasn't always what I get to do today. I came from the world of finance, actually. So when I graduated from the London School of Economics, I started my career in the financial industry at what was probably the worst possible time. It was the middle of 2007, a year before the financial crisis swept across the planet. And just to make things a little interesting, the company I started with was Lehman Brothers, which collapsed into administration in September 2008. And I was in and out of jobs post the crisis and the recovery from the crisis for nearly 10 years, before realizing that success and fulfillment were two different things. You could look successful on paper and on the outside, but deep inside you could be unfulfilled. And that was me. So even though the experience was dark at the time, as it is when you go through any redundancy or restructuring, in hindsight, it was a beautiful blessing in disguise, because it kickstarted for me the longest journey we as humans make, the inches from our heads to our hearts. Never an easy journey, but the most important and fulfilling. And that's where the understanding of energy came in. I realized that when I was in the financial services industry, I got completely burnt out. I was a junior, I was working long hours, my sleep suffered, I didn't have time for exercise, I was surviving on junk food. And I realized that if I didn't address it, I would stand to lose more than just my job and my health. I would lose my relationship and any sense of purpose that I had for my future. And so I decided to build a path outside of the financial services sector towards doing something more fulfilling. And I knew it didn't lie in working for someone. It lay in working for myself. I just didn't know what that was yet, but it was a catalyst for me to begin focusing on myself.
Do you think energy and depression overlaps? You know, when you describe low energy, I mean, some people might call that depression.
It is. I think that where anxiety comes from is not living and being in the present. If you're dwelling on the past, if you're anxious about the future, you're going to feel these emotions. You're going to have mental health issues. But when you're focused on the present and on what you can control over what you can't, that's when you feel a sense of empowerment, when you feel a sense of energy. I was in that position as well. I spent so many years focusing on things outside of my control. But I realized that all that led to was being paralyzed by overthinking.
Well, there's a couple of points here. One is, I guess people would say almost the dinosaur brain, or the vascular nervous system, whatever. This system we have, which is sort of constantly looking back and looking forward, is one aspect that is unhelpful. Like being present is difficult. But you also mentioned the word anxiety. I mean, that's not necessarily at the core of everyone's lack of energy, is it? Anxiety, or do you feel it is? Is that fundamental?
It's not the core, but it plays a part.
Yeah.
So if I take a step back, the way I see energy is that in popular culture, we all know about energy. If you look at the Star Wars film franchise, we call it the Force.
It's so funny, actually, the Star Wars reference, because I so often think how Star Wars got it right. You know, someone who's explored ayahuasca and things like this, and the sort of the energy and the spiritual and everything. It's like, actually, I think Star Wars is about right. You know what I mean? And like, there's an energy in all of us. There's a life force that binds us.
Yeah.
You know, it connects us. We feel it. You know, you have a lot of serendipitous moments where, I mean, I just had one this week. I was just thinking about someone who I used to work with. I haven't seen in like a year, and I thought about them for like 20 minutes or so. Next day, email Andy, can I see you? And I was, coincidence. Maybe it's coincidence.
If we take a step back, we all know about energy in popular culture. So if you practice yoga, you would call this prana. If you come from my Chinese culture, you would call this qi. If you watch the Star Wars film franchise, you would call it the Force. Now, whatever you label it as, we're all talking about the same thing, which is energy as a life force. Even Maya Angelou said that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they will never forget the way you made them feel. Now, if we bring this into the world of business, what this means is that people do not buy your products, your services, or your ideas as much as they buy your energy. Now, when we think about energy, it can be split into 4 dimensions. You have physical energy, mental energy, emotional energy, and spiritual energy. Now, we tend to focus exclusively on physical energy. So if you think about the resolutions we make at the beginning of each year, the ones we make tend to be focused on getting healthier, signing up to a gym, addressing our diet, or having better work-life balance. That's all to do with physical energy. But we don't tend to look at the other dimensions. Mental energy, which is all about focus, creativity, and mindset. Emotional energy, which is about the relationship you have with yourself and other people. And spiritual energy, which is all about meaning and purpose. When you're doing something that is meaningful for you, that allows you to express your potential, you're going to be in a state of flow. When you're doing something that goes against your values, that doesn't allow you to express your potential, you are low on spiritual energy. And this often manifests itself through physical tension in the body. So effectively, there's looking after your physicality, but actually maybe the most important one is this spiritual, this feeling of whether or not
Yeah, I mean, a flow state is something quite specific, but that you're going in a direction that, you know, fits with your values.
Absolutely.
I mean, that one, for me, that's almost more important than anything. I mean, I know people who have got amazing energy and eat McDonald's all day. You know, I can think of one person literally who they have a terrible diet. I mean, they're still young, but you wouldn't think it. That, you know, probably because their values and things drive them forward. I mean, I guess you would always say you need to do everything right, I guess.
I would say physical energy is the foundation.
Okay.
Because health is always the first wealth. During the pandemic, what we saw is that if you're healthy, you have lots of hopes, dreams, and goals. But if you're sick, you have only one: to be healthy again. And so without your health, you can't do anything else. This is why physical energy is the first thing I addressed and the first thing I encourage everyone to address. Because when you feel physically healthy, you're able to then focus on all the other areas. You know, there's no point kind of addressing your mental, emotional, spiritual energy if you're not even well to do that, if you don't have the health to do so.
Yeah, everyone's mad about their health though now, aren't they? I mean, certainly in London, everyone's crazy for it. I mean, we were just talking about some of the young kids getting them out networking at some of these events that we always used to have to go to. And we're like, yeah, people aren't going anymore. And then I said, the thing is, lots of them don't drink anymore. And back when I was 22, you know, it was like, well, there's free drink and I can't talk to anyone unless it's a terrifying situation. So, I mean, there's some funny byproducts of the healthy thing. You know, this new healthy world is maybe less chaotic, or I don't know. There's some small benefits of a social lubricant. What about, out of interest? I mean, I don't know whether you get into the science at all. I mean, our energy is literally given to us by mitochondria. You know, is that something you've ever looked at all? Out of interest, to sort of, you know, I don't think they're that well, they're not very thought about, but, you know, effectively the things that convert and provide energy. You know,
I mean, I don't look at it too much in terms of science point of view because that's not my background. Yeah. My goal is to look at what I've learned from my own journey and to articulate it in a way in which the mass market can understand it. Now, the furthest I get to is that if you look at physics, we are all energy. We are all energetic beings. You know, if you look at an atom, the majority of that space in an atom is made out of energy. And this is why if I were to translate that into everyday language, what that means is that energy is like this universal language that has no words, yet you and I can feel it. You know, you could walk into a room, you mentioned networking event earlier. You could walk into a business networking event, two people come up to you, but for some reason you're drawn more to someone than the other person. You feel like I've got to introduce myself to this person over the other, but you don't know why. There's a certain energy that draws you to want to have a conversation with someone. And that is energy. That space between you and that person is energy. There's something happening in there that we can't explain. Yeah. And it's a feeling that drives us.
Yeah, it's so true. And actually, weirdly, it works on Zoom as well as in person. No, really weirdly, I was really surprised. I've had a couple of experiences that I'm like, oh, I thought this stuff was very chemical, like there were like, you know, like pheromones or there's like things, your body language and stuff. But, you know, I've had a couple of situations where I'm like, oh, wow, I feel this like connection with this person. So it can happen through time and space too. But anyway, so your focus is to drive a conversation about look at these things through the lens of energy. Don't look at it in terms of your time management's not good enough. That'll all sort itself out if you've got things in the right direction. And I would have thought the health stuff is fairly well documented now. You know, I mean, eat vegetables, don't eat McDonald's, and, you know, like do some exercise, and, you know, but then the more difficult one, the sort of getting yourself in a good spiritual place. I wonder whether sometimes that's almost a privilege. Like it's not necessarily something that's easy. Like lots of situations. I mean, a lot of people in war or whatever, that it's hard for them to fix that. I mean, can you fix the spirituality regardless of your situation?
I would say, of course, there are some privileges, but it is not to say it's the only way that you can access meaning and purpose. I mean, if you look at the world, Bhutan, for example, is often cited as the happiest place on earth. But it's not like a modern skyscraper city that has all the amenities that we're accustomed to. And I think if you look at that example, what it shows us is that you can have happy rich people and depressed rich people. You can have happy poor people and depressed poor people. It's what you make of the circumstance. You don't always get to choose the cards you are dealt in life. More often than not, it's down to how you respond to them.
It's a question of connection, a lot of it, is it? What do you know what's special about Bhutan? What do they think it is that makes what if you survey people, they're the happiest there or something, is it?
Yeah, because if you look at modern economies, the way that we look at our economy is we measure it by GDP. We look at GDP. They look at it not from GDP, but GHP, as in gross happiness. They
measure it like that.
They measure happiness, and they make happiness a focus as part of their initiative by the government. And they look at how do we create a culture where happiness is an experience that our country can enjoy. And I think that's so important, because when you think about happiness in life and also in business, happiness results in better productivity. You know, if you go into work and you feel happy in the environment you're in, you feel happy with the colleagues and the managers you work with, guess what happens? You end up giving more than your basic job description. You end up sharing more of your potential with your colleagues at work because you feel happy, and that happiness becomes infectious. But when you're unhappy, guess what? The opposite happens.
Yeah, hate makes hate and love makes love.
Yeah.
I mean, I find the word happy a bit loaded because it's a transient state. I think maybe we use the word happy a lot. Like every time we ask the question, you know, what did your parents want you to be? They wanted me to be happy. But, you know, I think happiness, you'll be happy, you'll be sad, you're angry. You need to progress. Maybe it's contentment. Maybe happy is just an easy shorthand for human.
I would say the word that comes to my mind, just as you were sharing it, Andy, is probably peace.
Do you find that British people can be quite cynical about these as concepts? I'm trying to imagine Britain doing the happy index, you know, and them issuing each week like, well, Britain's happiness index. People would be like, oh, shut up, mate, you know?
No, absolutely. I think that if you haven't been exposed to the benefits of something you've never tried, of course you will be cynical. I was cynical about all the things I now do before I got involved in the industry and the work I...
Don't knock it till you've tried it.
Yeah, don't knock it till you try it. And for me, it's once I saw the benefits of applying the principles and lessons to my own life, it was at that point I wanted to share it with other people. Yeah. I wanted to coach and mentor others. I wanted to share what I was learning on stage in interviews like this, because I knew the impact it can have. Otherwise, what I was noticing when I took a step back and I looked at society as a whole is that too many of us were falling into this tragic scenario of living as if we are never going to die and then dying having never really lived.
Whoa, there's a sentence.
And you only really observe that when you take a step back, because we're so caught up in the machine of the everyday. And we mistakenly believe that if I'm busy, I'm productive. And if I'm not busy, I'm not productive. And we confuse the two. I mean, you can be busy running around in circles, but not going anywhere. That is not productive. And so I think that in our lives, we have to find that rhythm between work and rest. You've got to work in order to make progress. And you also have to have moments where you can pull back so you can make sense of the world, that you can have a deeper level of self-awareness and connect the dots. That's how creativity is born. That's how knowledge is created. Otherwise, you're just an autopilot. And before you know it, all those years have gone by and you say to yourself, where did all that time go?
How long's this journey been for you?
I quit the corporate industry around the end of 2016. So it's nearly 10 years since I quit working in the financial services industry and embarking on the path of entrepreneurship.
Okay. And that's what you started. You quit that. You started as an entrepreneur, as a speaker? No.
So I started off as a coach. I started working with anyone and everyone that wanted to be coached. I mean, now I'm very selective. I have the luxury of being more selective now. So recently I've worked with people like Michelin star chefs, CEO and founders of some of the country's biggest organizations, and one of the country's top heart surgeons. That then led me to speaking, because one of my clients said to me, Simon, I really enjoy our coaching sessions and conversations. Do you do speaking? Because I think our leadership team could benefit from some of the things that you talk about. And I said, no, but I'm happy to explore it. That first company was Barclays. They got me in. And on the back of that, they said, hey, can we book you again? And we ended up shooting a commercial together, which went out on all the Barclays branches and the cinema.
Oh, really? With you doing like a little bit in the commercial, was it?
It was a brief interview that was, I think it's about 15, 20 minutes, but in the commercial, it was condensed to about 20, 25 seconds.
Yeah, wow.
But that was my first exposure to speaking and doing media work. And then I said to myself, well, maybe there's something there.
Yeah.
And then suddenly I had other emails coming and say, hey, can you come and speak to our company? Can you speak at this conference? And so speaking suddenly became a bigger part of my business. And then that led to media work with the BBC and Sky News in 2019. And then shortly after that, because of that exposure, I had a meeting with Penguin, who said, hey, have you published a book yet? We would love to partner with you to publish your first book. And so I spent the COVID pandemic indoors writing my first book, which was published in 2022.
There's quite a Buddha vibe to this, isn't there? Sort of the quest to sort of become at peace and, get your energy right. There's some Buddhist values in there. I mean, what I know about Buddhism could be written on the back of a fag packet, but, in essence, the way, maybe I'll ask the question a different way. Do you get to a state of, right, that's it. I'm there now. Simon is at peace, or is this forever an improvement thing,
First of all, I think there is no there. There is no there, because then what's next? And this is my issue with goals, is that goals are important, but what's better is having a system for living, a philosophy of being. Because let's say your goal is to run a marathon. So you train, you prepare, and then you finally run the marathon. You've hit that goal. What next? Yeah. In many cases, people revert back to their bad habits. Or, if you look at a sports team, they say our goal is to win the championship. They win the championship. Do they retain it the next year? No, it's damn hard. They might slip down the table. I mean, you look at Leicester in the Premier League, they won it that one year, and they found it difficult to retain it again and again because we get complacent.
I read a very interesting thing about why there's so many things they argue only humans do and animals don't do. I'm quite sure that's not true, especially when you start talking about things like dolphins. But apparently, one of the abilities, because we're pack hunters, the reason we think back and think forward is that ability to visualize things in the past and then imagine them in the future is fundamental to be able to hunt in packs and replan strategies to catch things. So they wonder if it's a sort of, this is some New Scientist article from years ago, but that it's a kind of trap of our brain, that it gives us this ability to do this, but traps us in this constant sort of planning mode of how are we going to catch the buffalo and stuff like that. Because really what you're saying is don't set a goal to get there and not know where. Just, there's no future, there's no past. There's just now, do now.
It's focus on the systems and habits that will allow you to win again and again and again and again. And so the way you do that is to focus on your identity and your being. So when you think about goal and achievement, instead of saying to myself, how am I going to get to this goal? Say to yourself, who must I become to make these goals easy to achieve? So when you come from that place, you're then looking at what you can change yourself, whether that's your mindset, whether that's your habits, whether those are your choices. Because when you put together a solid foundation and you are learning every single day, and I think this is one of the biggest challenges for anybody, whether you are working in a company or you're working for yourself, is remaining an eternal student, constantly learning and relearning, because the world is going to change. The world is changing at a very rapid pace. And the only way for you to keep up is to be able to adapt. And the only way you can adapt is to be a constant learner, to have that white belt mentality. And I think that's far more important, because it means you can ride the waves of change rather than be disrupted by them.
What do you find? Is this something you find you give a lot as a particular piece of advice if you're dealing with leadership? Is there sort of a commonality or a classic problem that people face in that you would give as a piece of advice, where they're stuck, I mean, I imagine you first got to read their energy. They come to you, they might be full of beans, but, worrying about their business or whatever it is. But coaching the thing you're trying to bring to the world is trying to sort of focus on this from the prism of energy. So out of that prism, is there a very common thing people do wrong?
Absolutely. The biggest challenge for businesses is how your teams work together. How do they operate as a team? That is the biggest challenge. There was this, you may have come across it, there was this spaghetti experiment done many years ago in the early 2000s. It was a challenge in which they brought two groups of people together. They brought CEOs of organizations into one room, and they brought MBA students into another. And they gave them a challenge. Each had on their table 20 pieces of spaghetti, dried spaghetti, a yard of string, a yard of tape, and a marshmallow. And in 18 minutes, they had to construct the tallest tower, with the only goal being to have the marshmallow balancing on top. However, there was a little twist put into this. There was a third room put in with kindergarten children.
Yeah.
And at the end of these 18 minutes, what they found is that on average, because they were split into teams within their respective rooms, on average, the kindergarten children built the tallest structures. Why? Because when they analyzed the data, they saw that the MBA students and the CEOs spent over 50% of those 18 minutes playing status games and planning and overthinking. So it was saying things such as, who's going to lead this team? Whose idea is better? Which ideas are we going to vote on that we're going to experiment with? Whereas the kindergarten children
just
went straight into action. They didn't think about who's leading, what sort of status games were playing. They didn't overplan. They just got their hands dirty, and they learned by doing. And they were bumping into each other. They were sharing ideas as they went along. They were constantly iterating. So they had already gone through many iterations before they got to the end of that time. Whereas these other two groups, the MBA students and the CEOs, towards the end of the time, they were just getting around to their first or second idea.
And what's the main lesson we should draw from that?
I would say a couple of lessons to take from that is, number one of the greatest skills you can develop is collapsing that gap between idea and execution.
Collapsing a gap between idea and
Because it's easy to get ideas, but how many of those ideas do you implement? Yeah. And so that's the first lesson. The second, which goes back to what I was saying earlier, is that it is not how smart people are individually, it's how smart they work together. If you look on paper about how smart people were individually, you would put your money on the MBA students or the CEOs, not the kindergarten children. But the reason the kindergarten children won wasn't because they were smarter individually. It is because they worked smarter together.
But how do you untap that? How do you get a group of people to do that? I mean, ignorance is bliss, for the kids, isn't it? It's hard to unravel all of our social norms,
Absolutely. And this is why when you look at businesses, it's a two-pronged approach. It's how the individual shows up at work, but it's also what the leadership team implements. Because just like in parenting, children don't follow what the parent says they should do. They follow their actions. Yeah. Actions speak more than words. And it's the same thing in business. If your leader says, we should do this, but the leader themselves or the leadership team themselves don't embrace it or apply it to their way of working.
Yeah, do as I say, not as I do. So you very much lead from the front, You need to come in the office every morning if you want other people to come in the office, all of that.
You cannot lead others effectively unless you are powerfully leading yourself first. It begins with you. You set the tone. Even in vulnerability, if you want people to be vulnerable, you have to be vulnerable yourself. And I've often said to leaders I've either coached or consulted with, vulnerability does not make you any less of a leader. It simply makes you more human. And in today's world, employees want to be able to relate to their leaders.
Vulnerability is very powerful.
It's powerful. It's how we connect. By me in a position of leadership saying, hey, we've got this really challenging season coming up. I would love to hear your ideas because while I have some myself, I don't know everything. And I know you will be open to exploring various other areas in your jobs. And I'm sure you will see and hear things I won't. And I would love for us to meet regularly so we can brainstorm together. Now, to demonstrate vulnerability like that means you are coming from a place of humility, not ego. And people then want to fight for you. People want to see you succeed rather than playing politics behind your back.
Yeah, and we had a very interesting conversation the other day too, because the word leader always conjures up, someone in charge of a lot of people. But there's sort of, when you break down a business or anything, I mean, you might be dealing with the person at the top, but there's so many leadership groups, there's so many, it breaks down into components the whole time, doesn't it?
It does. And that's why, especially when you're dealing with a big organization, the focus is how do you empower people at every level to show up demonstrating qualities of good leadership. Yeah. Because imagine just for a moment, you have a company in which everyone from the most junior to the most senior demonstrates leadership qualities. That's a powerful team to be a part of.
What are the things that people most do wrong in that regard? Okay, so they've got to be humble or have some humility. They've got to, I guess a lot of the hierarchy I question, because empowerment is almost trying to break down hierarchy in a way. What do you feel about hierarchy within an organization?
I think some hierarchy is essential in the sense that you need to kind of know the setup of a company. You know who reports into who's leading what project. There has to be some sense of a hierarchy. But the way we empower people to show up with leadership qualities is to coach them, not manage them. And there's a difference here. If I manage someone, it means I tell you what to do, you do it by this date, and then we succeed. I'm telling you what to do, I'm micromanaging you. Anybody can manage, but not everyone can lead. In theory, anybody can manage because it's just giving orders. Any one of us can give an order, but leadership's different because leadership is much more about coaching. And there was a great project called Project Oxygen, conducted by Google in 2008, that looked at what made for great leaders. So they spent 12 months looking at qualitative and quantitative data about what made for great leaders. And they came up with 8 factors ranked by level of importance. And number 1 was that the best leaders at Google were great coaches. Number 8 was their technical ability. Now, if you look at the conclusions from this, what you will see is that just because you may be a great engineer, a great salesperson, a great project manager, does not automatically make you a great leader. It's your ability to coach people to success.
Yeah. When you say coach, that then suggests you don't have to lead from the front, because a coach often sits at the sidelines, don't they?
This is where empowerment comes in. Yeah. You're going forward together.
Okay, you're going forward together. Nice. And then how have you seen this play out? Is it that you can start with someone at the top of an organization, shift their view, and then it'll flow through the business? Or, I guess they've got to coach their immediates and they've got to teach everyone to coach, basically.
Yeah, any shift in culture, in way of leading a company takes time. It is not going to happen overnight.
Is culture the most important thing in a company?
I would say one of the most important, if not the most important, but definitely one of the most important.
Yeah.
Because culture impacts everyone's energy. Yeah. How you show up in a company is a driver of a company's culture. If the company's culture is toxic, then guess what? You're going to fear making mistakes. Yeah. You're going to fear being picked on because it doesn't feel safe being in that company. Whereas if the culture is one of growth, if the culture is one of empowerment, if the culture is one of we're in this together, then guess what? Whatever happens, you can all pull together as a team.
Even if you've got brilliant leaders and a great culture, you only need a few very complex characters to join and really screw things up. And they could be in junior positions, starting to just stir and spread information and whatever. And generally speaking, now I'm getting vaguely older, I would sort of say when you look at those people in isolation, they usually have some issues about groups and social behavior, and, there's something not quite functioning right, yeah. But that's the nature of it, isn't it? There's only so much, a leader can do. I think once you've got a strong culture, a few bad eggs, the culture will point it out and say, we're having trouble with these people.
And this is why a company's hiring process is so important.
It's a nightmare hiring though, man.
It's a nightmare hiring.
What's a good hiring process? Whatever you do, it's a guesswork, isn't it?
It is a guesswork to an extent. But you can be a little more conscious about it, because very often when we hire for a specific skill or function. And we say, does this person have the right skills and function to make this job a success? But what often gets forgotten in the hiring process is their attitude. Is how do they approach challenges? Because when everything's good, then it doesn't matter if they're a little toxic because everybody's happy. But it's what happens when things go south. when things don't always go as we expect? How do they respond to those situations?
I always wanted to do you can't, now it's all online, but when you do it in person, like you put them in a meeting room, turn up late, like they ask for coffee, give them tea. They say, sorry, I want a coffee, give them coffee with sugar in it, like piss them off, and see how they start reacting, like add some stress to it. So, and then see how they're like, oh, if they start kicking off because their gracefulness of how they respond to all of that, you know what I mean? So what's your long-term goal? Your long-term goal is ...
It has been an evolution, Andy. So, when I first started business, my long-term goals are very similar to many entrepreneurs. It was to hit a certain financial target. It was to hit certain milestones. But as I've grown older and wiser, my only goal right now is just to be better than who I was yesterday. It's a very simple goal, but I think it is an effective one, because if you are constantly better than who you were yesterday, you will make progress.
How do you measure that?
Because you can feel it. You can feel it. It's hard to measure, but you can feel it. You know when you look in the mirror at the end of each day whether you've given it your best. You have to be your own judge, but you also have to be honest with yourself. Have you given your best today? Have you improved a little bit today than who you were yesterday? And the reason that became my focus is because I remember going to Japan. So my wife and I, we loved Japan before the pandemic. We went every year, three years in a row. We were planning to go on for fourth year in a row, but then of course the pandemic hit. And I remember in Kyoto, we went to this temple, and there was an English translation on one of the statements. And it said, be attached to no outcome and open to everything. Now, if we break this down, what it means by being attached to no outcome, it means that you are not giving up your emotional well-being to something that may or may not happen in the future. Because what does that mean you are in a moment? You're constantly frustrated, angry, depressed, anxious.
Isn't social media the biggest problem of this then?
It is a big factor. And so you can live in the present. And then the second part of that statement, be open to everything, means that you're not rigid. It means that you're able to be flexible. You're able to listen to the nudges from the universe, like the way I did by going into speaking. When I first started, I said to myself, if I can build a thriving coaching practice, I will already be a happy man. But I did not factor in that speaking, media work, writing a book would later on become part of my ecosystem.
Yeah, I'm almost imagining a world where we're going to get to this stage that our phones are telling us whether we're a better person. You're like, Simon, you were swearing less a week ago and you did more exercise.
Well, to be fair, I mean, we have health trackers now. I noticed you're wearing an Apple Watch, Andy. I'm wearing one of these health rings. And so they give us data. They say, has your sleep improved? Have you moved your body enough?
Oh, God, don't that one. Stand up. I mean, I turn all that shit off, but I mean, that just like, I'm fascinated who's out there. Maybe it's the rebel in me who's like, stand up. Oh, right. Yeah, I'll stand. Yeah, they're like on a train or like in the middle of a conversation and you're like, you're all right. You're standing up now, mate. They're funny, some of that. But I think there's certainly something nice in the visualization, isn't it? I like the idea that you stare yourself in the mirror and you say, am I better or not? I know a lot of creative people and rappers and stuff who would say that, an artist, that every time you do something, it has to be better than the last time you did it. That's the sort of like a lot of people are really good at that sort of stuff. That's the brutalism that they put themselves after.
There was a quote shared by the British philosopher Alain de Botton. And he said, good man, he shared some good stuff. And he said this on an interview. He said, if you are not embarrassed by who you were a year ago, you are not learning or growing enough. And that is the result. If you're learning and growing enough, if you're constantly better than who you were yesterday, guess what? In a year from now, you're going to look back and be embarrassed by who you were a year ago, because that's how much you have grown. That's how much you have progressed. And Andy, you said something on social media earlier. And I think there's just two things to extract from that. Social media at the end of the day is just a tool. And it comes down to how we use it. So just in the same way that if you give a knife to a murderer, it will kill someone. If you give a knife to a surgeon, it will save someone's life. The knife is just a tool. It's your intention behind using it. So social media, if you have no conscious intention, you will fall into the trap of comparing your life to other people's highlight reel. And that's where we suffer in society. because we're constantly comparing ourselves to other people and we feel like we're always behind. But if we have an intention to use social media for value, now what I mean by this is I've benefited from social media. I've been able to share my work through social media platforms. People can watch my videos. People can interact with what I'm sharing. That's allowed me to create a brand. That's allowed me to share my message with people beyond just the country I'm living in. And when we think about comparison, you can't avoid it. You're always going to be looking at other people, whether it's social media, whether it's hearing from a friend when you catch up that somebody else is off doing amazing things. That's always going to be coming into your mind. But when you look at other people, look at them for inspiration, not comparison. Yeah. Because if you look at them for comparison, it's going to make you feel jealous, it's going to make you feel envious, it's going to make you feel depressed. But if you look at them for inspiration, it's going to get you questioning, well, what can I learn from that person? What can I do differently? Having learned what has helped them get to where they are. That's far more productive.
I wonder in what you say too, when it's like, you're going to work on yourself, you're going to work on yourself and whatever, work on yourself. I wonder like whether you get to the end and do the whole like, well, I'm 80, I don't give a piss about anything anymore. I mean, it would be nice that at the end there's a kind of like, okay, just fall apart and just chill out. I mean, I think probably you would always work on yourself once you build that mindset, but you know, work has a meaning in that word. You know, work is hard. You know, I mean, you get benefits from it, but
it's interesting. You say it's hard. Everything in life is hard, but you just got to find your hard, the hard that you're willing to suffer for. But at the same time, this is where happiness comes from. If you can choose what you're willing to suffer for and struggle for, that's how you experience happiness, because you show yourself you're someone that can fight for something that you believe in and that you value. There's a word that we use a lot on social media called passion. Everyone says follow your passion, chase your passions, do what you're passionate about. And we tend to think passions are things that bring us joy. You know, I've got so many things I'm passionate about. How do I choose? And then that led to this word called multi-passionate. What we forget about passion is that the definition of the origin of the word passion is to suffer for something. So really the question should be not what you're passionate about, but what are you willing to suffer and struggle for in order to see through to the end?
Hard to work that out.
It is hard. We don't wake up one morning and go, I know exactly what I want to do for the rest of my life. It's not like we're in a Hollywood film. This doesn't happen straight away. The reality of how this works is that you get given clues. You know, it could be a conversation sparks something inside of you, or you find yourself curious about something. And then it is up to us to follow those crumbs of curiosities to see where they lead.
Do you believe it's almost fate? You're given almost signs and you should pay attention to the signs almost?
We're always given signs. The question is whether we're ready to take action on them. I think inspiration will always strike us, but if we're not ready...
As long as it finds you working.
Exactly. Inspiration will always find us, but if we're not ready to take action on that inspiration, it will go and find someone else.
Yeah, it's very true about where your mental health is in terms of whether you can take action on it. You know, I think the way things affect you, whether they be grief or very difficult situations, it's very hard sometimes to see through those. But, you know, I would argue at the same time, things getting worse, you falling apart, you know, as long as you don't end up dead, you know, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. You know, it's like the worst thing that ever happens to you is often the best thing that ever happens to you, you know.
And this just shows, Andy, that perspective is reality and reality is perspective. We don't appreciate that we live in the feeling of our thinking moment to moment to moment. Now, what this means is that there is no one common reality. There is only your customized reality. So when an event happens, an event itself is neutral. It does not have an emotion. You know, when a car crashes into a wall, the wall doesn't get sad and the car doesn't get angry. But as humans, we have to derive meaning from an event. And this is why the same event for some people can be interpreted as happy, and for others, it could be interpreted as sad. You get to choose the meaning.
One man's treasure is another man's junk. I greatly agree with what you're saying about whether it be COVID, whether it be anything. You may have had very negative experiences from there, but they're just things happening. You know, definitely, you know, there's good and bad things that come from it. You know, it's almost too polarized to think about that. I think you speak very beautifully about very positive things there. I mean, out of this, is there a real difficulty you face yourself still?
We all face challenges. I still face challenges.
Which bit do you find it most difficult, do you think? Looking after your spirituality or your health, or is there a particular challenge?
Right now, the most challenging thing is running a business and being a parent.
Oh, yeah. Okay. How old are your kids?
We've got one daughter. She's 4.5 years old.
Oh, gosh, I'm with you, mate. I've got a 5 and a 3-year-old.
Oh, wow. So we're very similar stage there.
Yeah.
And so that is, of course, a challenge, because how you operated before being a parent is, of course, very different to when you are now a parent.
No, it's incredibly different. I think the stress it puts on you is just like, I think it's a privilege to be a parent, and it comes with huge responsibility, you know.
I mean, I've learned so much through parenting. I mean, one of the biggest lessons I've learned is that children, and then if you broaden it out, people generally don't want your time as much as they want your energy and presence.
So true.
You know, I could spend an evening with my daughter, but if I'm on my phone or I'm thinking about work, I'm not really there with her, and she can pick that up. But if I'm clocked out of work, if I turn my phone to flight mode and I'm with her, my energy is with her, I'm present with her in that moment, she connects with me at a far deeper level.
Yeah, it's a bit like, it's quite hard to play with a young kid and understand what they want to play, but they just want you to watch them play almost. They just want your presence. They just want to be, and they do that thing of, oh, daddy, look, I can do this. Like, you know, and there's a bit that breaks my heart when you phrase that, because you know, as someone whose attention is easily distracted, and I've been through a bit of a tricky time with sis dying and stuff, but it's like, yeah, being, you know, that word present, but yeah, all those moments I've wasted, you know, reading a text, doing something else, you know, it's tough that. But look, I mean, this weekend I decided to be very present, and I'm way behind on my work now, and everyone's shouting at me like, when are you going to do your bills? You haven't done your bills. You didn't do your provisions. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, there were other reasons why it happened, but I sat there on Sunday and thought, well, that's just work. And like, you know, these moments are not going to last. I could be gone tomorrow. So I'm just going to enjoy hanging out with them.
Because what happens, and I came to realize this myself, is that if you fast forward to the 80-year-old version of yourself, and now imagine your kids they've gone off to college.
Yeah, they're not interested anymore.
They've gone off to run their own lives. They're away from home. You're going to wish that you could go back to today and spend another hour with your kids in the way they're at right now today.
It's hard to get that balance there. It's hard to get all the balance. I mean, there's so much to do.
There is so much to do, but the one thing to understand, and my friend who works in the health services shared this with me, and I thought it was a great analogy. He said, if I focus on trying to make the waiting room empty, it will never happen. Every time I see a patient, I go back into the waiting room, there's another patient to see. There's another patient to see. The waiting room will always be full. And it's the same with work. You think you can eliminate all the work on your to-do list? No, there will always be work.
Work don't die. As my father-in-law says, people do.
Yeah, there will always be work to do, but you've only got one life with your children.
I guess then it's the analyzing, although time isn't your metric, you need to get your energy right so that you can get 110% out of every, you know, hour. No, but it's true, you know, I mean, I've been through a period where my energy's been really off at times, and life is difficult like that. But you can really focus on trying to get your energy right, and then probably you do need, and maybe that's where life coaching comes in again, all those sorts of things, to be quite brutal about your diary and when you're spending time, you know?
It's so important, because we are quick to say yes to a meeting invite in our calendar. We are quick to say yes to social events.
It's hard to say no.
It's hard to say no to them, but how quick are we to say yes to me time? To blocking out time in your calendar just for you? We don't. I don't think many people actually have me time blocks in their calendar.
Or to block out time for your kids like you would, it was a really important meeting.
Yeah. And even if we do block out time in our calendar, how often do we still move the goalposts? Because something comes up and we say, oh yeah, I can do it. I can always do that with my kid another time.
Yeah.
We don't treat it with the same priority as we would with a work meeting.
No.
And so it becomes easy to move it around.
Because there's this sort of illusion with work that work is sort of, well, it's work. You know, it's so important, you know, it takes precedent over everything, doesn't it? You know, and to be unavailable, certainly in my role and stuff, to be not able to get back, you know, talking it aloud, you know, within my job, it's like, if I don't deliver, then you might lose the client. So what? I don't want to let them down. Why do you want to let them down? Well, your ego, basically. It's unpleasant to your ego to feel, I mean, I don't like letting people down. It's nice to help people, but really, what stops you saying no a lot of the time? There's definitely an ego piece.
It also comes down to your ability to communicate the way you work and your boundaries. It's quite interesting because Warren Buffett was once asked, what is the most important skill that we should focus on in terms of our career development and leadership potential? And he condensed it into one word. He said, your communication. Now, what he meant by this is not just being a good public speaker. I mean, that helps, but communication in all of its facets. So whether that's communicating your boundaries, how you operate, communicating through different mediums like email or speaking to your organization. If you understand how to communicate effectively, then that is going to be one of the biggest indicators of your growth in a business or career, because people are impacted by what you communicate. If you're a good communicator, then you can lift up the energy of an organization. If you're a good communicator, then you can establish healthy boundaries.
What if you're not a good communicator?
Then I think it's something we must work on. I'll give you an example. Let's say your technical skills are a 10 out of 10. You are excellent at your job, but your communication skills is a 2 out of 10. Now, however good your technical skills are, if your communication skills are a 2 out of 10, guess what people think your technical skills are?
Yeah, 2,
probably very
maybe
low.
3.
Very low. Now, let's say your technical skills are 5 or 6 out of 10, but your communication skills are a 10 out of 10. How do you think people will perceive you?
Better.
A lot higher. And this is kind of, if you look at this in the real world, this is how Barack Obama built such a huge following. His communication skills was a 10 out of 10. His technical skills wasn't very high. He had no experience. Then this is why, if you look at the decisions he made, this is why he brought in Joe Biden as his vice president. He made up for his lack of experience.
Right.
Joe Biden had the experience that Barack Obama lacked, but he knew that. Yeah. But he also knew he had good communication skills. And so we in the public, we listened to the communication that Barack Obama shared, the message he put to the nation. And regardless of what his background was, we all thought that his technical skills were a lot higher.
Well, the power of communication, someone's name beginning with H, ending in R comes up from Germany. I mean, clearly he had a mastery of communication. That was the story of Hitler, that he came along and had this ability. And again, it was a lot to do with cadence and just sort of how he spoke was very unsettling and very sort of, engaging, I mean, but communicate, you've got to over-communicate constantly. Is there any great communication you've received, any great advice you've received that sticks with you?
Some of them that come to my mind is the first thing is that if you want to make meaningful progress in your life and career, design an environment around you that makes it impossible not to succeed. Design an environment around you that makes it impossible not to succeed. Now, this isn't just the people you spend time with. This is what you watch, what you read, what you listen to, the physical spaces you're in, the digital spaces you're in. All of these things influence what you think about yourself and what you think is possible. And so when I was early in my entrepreneurial journey, that was one of the first things I focused on is how do I optimize my environment to be something that supports my journey and makes it easier for me to succeed.
It must be easier for some people rather than others to sort of, you feel very calm and structured. Is that your nature, or is this sort of more learned behavior and actually you're a bit ADHD originally, or do you know what I mean?
I think it has become my nature. It has not been my nature, but it has become my nature because of the work I do and because I'm always experimenting with stuff. My life has been very chaotic. Especially in the early years, I'm always trying stuff. I still try lots of different things today, but there is better structure, kind of forced on me in a way. I was saying earlier about being a parent. Once I became a parent, suddenly I had to have structure. And in a way, I think it does make you more productive because before I was a parent, you could procrastinate and be distracted by so many things with no impact because you didn't have children. You could spend the whole evening deciding on whether to move ahead on a project or not. Whereas now I know if I want the evenings to be with my child, I've got to finish by a certain time. So now I have a window. And when you have a window to get work done, if you want to enjoy time with the family,
focuses the mind.
Your focus heightens. It focuses the mind and you have to prioritize. And that for me made me more productive.
So you're being decisive because you're given a short interval, but how else can you develop decisiveness? That seems to be, or less procrastination,
I would say if you want to have less procrastination and be more decisive, it is to have clarity on where you're going. A lot of us don't have clarity on where we're going. And what I mean by this is, what does success mean to you?
In 5 years, in 10 years? I mean, success is a loaded word, isn't it? But it could mean lots of things.
And this is the point. Success is personal. And the reason many of us are exhausted is not because we're doing too much, but because we're doing too little of the things that bring us joy, and we're running someone else's race. And if you're running someone else's race, they're deciding the metrics of whether you're successful or not. Yeah. But if you can start to ask yourself, which I think few of us do, what does success mean to me personally? And the answer will be different for each of us. Just how will you know you're successful? What is your personal metric? And once you know what that personal metric is and what that vision looks like, it now becomes easier to make decisions, because you're making decisions with the reference of that vision you're working towards. And then in terms of procrastination, what I find is that the more compelling and the more magnetic a vision is, the easier it becomes to take action.
Yeah. And to do that, you've got to heal your wounds, I would say. I mean, I've been through quite a few weird things in my 30s and 40s and 20s, but actually what stays with me is what happened to me when I was a kid. And I think that's very common, the stuff that really is part of your DNA that happened to you before you were grown up. But I think this personal grief experience recently, the way it sort of rocked my world and shown me my weaknesses again, to your point of energy, you can only really power forward with energy if you've really, however you do it, dealt with whatever your pains and your wounds are. Because that's the thing trapping you in the past, isn't it?
You have to, because otherwise what's going to happen is you will be making decisions in your present based on your past self. And what you actually want to be doing, and this is a process, what you actually want to be doing is making present day decisions based on your future. Based on your future self, because then you're pulling yourself forward, which is a lot easier than trying to push yourself forward. Yeah. It's a very different energy. Push is like motivation. It's external, and it only lasts for so long. Whereas inspiration is more of a pulling force. You could be inspired one morning and you find yourself waking very early. You jump out of bed, but you don't know why. There's just something that's pulling you forward. And inspiration is internal, whereas motivation is external.
Let's just ask the question, what do you think is bullshit in your industry and why?
What do I think? I think not just in my industry, because this is quite general sort of response. I think in many business industries, what I think is bullshit is doing the same thing that has always been done before. I think we are now in an age where attention spans have never been as short as they are. And what it means is that we are dealing with a short attention economy. And so in order to appeal to the market, to your prospects, you've really got to understand how this all works. You've got to understand psychology. You've got to understand how to connect with people. And you can't do it in the ways that you've always done. You've got to be able to think differently. And this is why I think creativity as a skill is, if it hasn't already, is going to become a premium skill in the market, especially as artificial intelligence begins to take over a lot of the functional skills that we used to do, and they can now replace those skills. Creativity is going to become a premium skill. And it means that if you're not adapting, if you're not thinking different, if you're not experimenting all the time, you will be disrupted.
Are we doomed because attention spans are getting shorter and shorter? I mean, doesn't that make us dumber and dumber in a way? I mean, I'd be interesting to see if they go the other way, whether or not the AI will shift society enough that people's attention spans want to grow. But if we're all supposed to be improving ourselves all the time, we should be trying to improve our attention spans, I guess. It's such a concern.
It is. It is. I'm concerned for my children as they grow older.
So we're just going to ask you some quick questions. Answer as quickly as you can. You will definitely know the answer to these questions. If not, we may need to get you some coaching. Dee's cueing the music and we're off. What was your first job?
First job was working as a sales assistant at Boots.
Oh, what was your worst job?
That was probably the worst job. First jobs tend to be
What
the
were you
worst
doing?
jobs.
Cosmetics or something, were you know?
I was just working in the photography department at the time where people had to come and submit the film roll and then we had to develop it. So I was at the cashier taking their orders.
Do you flick through people's pictures? Sometimes, obviously not, but you know, that must have been very confidential.
Yeah, no, I wasn't in that part of the team, unfortunately. I just picked up the package.
Because they must come out the printer. Someone must be sitting there going, Jesus Christ, look at these ones, John. You know,
Yeah, those are all behind the
coming
scenes
out
there.
the back room. It's like, oh, that's fantastic. Take a couple of pictures of that one. Favorite subject at school?
Favorite subject at school was art.
Was it? Painting and, you know.
Just anything to do with art and design. I was very much a creative child, but unfortunately my parents were very traditional in their thinking.
Right.
And they said, Simon, don't pursue art. Have it as a hobby, but don't pursue it as a career because it won't pay the bills. The good thing is now I'm an entrepreneur. I make use of that creative part of my brain when it comes to launching services, coming up with marketing ideas, especially with regards to the book. You know, we did a partnership with a Connaught Hotel to create an energized cocktail. We put together one of the world's first book launches in the metaverse, so people could put on their VR headsets to be part of it.
What was the energized cocktail? Red Bull it must have had in it.
I have to send you the video after that. No, I let the head bartender at the Connaught Hotel design it. And then we worked with Jamie Oliver's production team to shoot the video of the cocktail being made.
Very cool, man.
And it was amazing. So for the first 4 weeks of publication, if you went to that bar, you ordered the cocktail, it would be put together for you and presented on the signed copy of my book. I mean, just imagine how many people are taking selfies, photos, and videos of the drink.
Very nice.
And then more recently, we partnered with a Michelin star chef to create a 6-course immersive dining experience in which each course was inspired by a message from my book.
Wow. Those are amazing things, man. What's your special skill?
Special skill is partly what I shared just now, is having diversity in my network, allowing me to be highly creative.
Because all those ideas you came up with, let's do a cocktail.
It came as a result of how diverse my network is. So when I started my business, I didn't want to spend all of my time just with other coaches and speakers. I wanted to think outside of the box.
That must be hilarious backstage with all the coaches, like coaching each other, you know?
Yeah, no, I mean, I do have coaches and speakers I spend time with, but I didn't want that to be the majority of my circle. And so I was very conscious about diversifying my network, because there's one thing I read in a business book which said that if you only look at your competition, you can only be as good as your competition. But when you look outside of your competition and industry, you can then start bringing in ideas from left field into your industry to look innovative and creative. And this is how Steve Jobs came up with the magnetic cord for the MacBook. He was on a trip to Japan. He saw a Japanese rice cooker company having a magnetic cord for their products. And he said, what's the reason you have a magnetic cord for the rice cooker? And they said, well, if a child was to trip on the wire, the appliance wouldn't hit them on the head. The wire would come out, but the appliance would stay still. And Steve Jobs said, we're going to bring that into the next MacBook. And so he took an idea from a completely different industry into the computer industry, and the journalists held it as a genius move. What an innovation. But the inspiration came from a completely different industry. So I think my special skill is that ability to think different and look outside
Translate.
Yeah.
Brilliant. And what did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, when I was young, what I wanted to be when I grew up was an actor. When I was young, because I was very much into film. I still am. I love
What's
films.
your favorite film?
Anything by Christopher Nolan. I'm a big fan of Christopher Nolan. But I would say outside of that, going back to my early years, I would say the 2 films that stood out to me when I was younger was Usual Suspects and Shawshank Redemption.
Oh yeah, nice. And what did your parents want you to be?
My dad wanted to be an engineer after him, and my mum wanted to be a doctor after her bit working in the health service.
Oh wow, what kind of engineer is he?
He qualified as an aeronautical engineer, but now he does structural engineering.
Okay. I think you did well. Do you do karaoke? What's your karaoke song?
I don't do karaoke, but I'm doing it a lot more now with my daughter. So I would say just on the back of what my daughter's interests are, it has been a lot of Taylor Swift recently.
God, people go mad for her.
It's interesting. I have a feeling that she might get into singing when she's older, because a lot of her friends, when they go into Disney Plus, they want to watch a cartoon or they want to watch an animated film. For her, as soon as Disney Plus comes on, it's Dad, Eras Tour. She wants to watch the Taylor Swift Eras Tour on Disney Plus.
No way.
Yeah.
Wow.
So at the moment, it's lots of Taylor Swift.
My kids are scared of everything, which is it's very adorable. Even Disney Plus. We've even Googled what's the least scary cartoon, and then it was Shaun the Sheep was one of the recommendations. My son was still terrified of it. He just makes this noise going like as he runs across the house. Have you ever been fired?
Have I been fired? Absolutely.
Have you?
Numerous times.
Oh, well done.
As I said, my first job was at Lehman. Lehman collapsed into administration. And even if I got another job in finance in the years after 2008, it wasn't a question if I could get a job. It's more a question, how long could I keep it? Because there was a lot of restructuring going on, new government regulation coming into place. And so I got fired numerous times. I also resigned numerous times. But I think looking back, Andy, it was like the universe was telling me I wasn't meant to be employed.
God, so if you were just a bit younger and you joined in 2001, you may still be in finance. You may have been like, this is fantastic. Greed is good. 5-6 years in, the money's rolling in. Who knows?
Absolutely. And this is why I think the universe works in mysterious ways, because if the crisis didn't happen, who knows, I may still be in finance. But because of the crisis, it got me questioning. Again, going back to what I shared with you earlier, it got me questioning what success was for me. And it sent me on this rabbit hole of exploring the world beyond finance. And it kind of helped me to create this exit plan to do what I get to do today.
Certainly more fun. And what's your vice?
My vice is probably travel. As in, I'm always looking at the next place to travel.
Hard with a 3.5-year-old, isn't it? Or 4.5-year-old?
Yes, she's not too bad, actually.
Really? Long distance flights?
Well, she's done 13 and a half hours when we went to Singapore in the summer. So we went to Singapore in the summer, and then we did Bali while we were over there as well.
How did you do it? Please tell me how you did a 14-hour flight with a...
So the great thing is it comes down to timing. So if you are going on a long-haul flight, especially if you're going east, it's easier because you're naturally going into the next day.
Yeah.
So if you get a nighttime flight, they're naturally going to feel sleepy about an hour or two into the flight. So then they're kind of knocked out for like 6 or 7 of those hours.
How'd you come back though?
Coming back, it's kind of similar because when you come back, I try and get a night flight. So you kind of naturally fall asleep going into the flight. So it's a lot to do to the timing. The worst is a daytime flight because then for the whole time on that flight, you're dealing with kids and then you're dealing with their constant requests and demands. So nighttime flights, if it's long haul, I would say it's the best option to go for.
If you've never experienced traveling with a very young child, please have pity on all the people who do. Any top tips for any entrepreneurs out there? Anything else you would share with them?
Any final top tips for entrepreneurs? I would say constantly be experimenting. Constantly experiment. The big challenge in entrepreneurship is we can fall into the trap of seeing success and failure as opposites, but to reframe failure as experimentation. If you reframe it as experimentation, it feels more positive. You gamify the journey, and when you gamify the journey, it gives you energy. Because if a process feels like a chore, it drains you of energy. If a process feels like fun, it gives you energy. So a question you could ask yourself if something feels draining at the moment in your journey as an entrepreneur is, what would this look like if this were more fun and easy? And just brainstorm some alternative routes.
You've got to get everyone else to kind of, isn't it your expectation what everyone else sees it as almost, Is it like you can say that, oh, I'm just experimenting, and you could feel that everyone around you saying, well, you're actually failing, mate, but
The key is what it feels like for you. I mean, this is what
Who cares what they think because you don't know anyway.
Exactly, because there is a certain level of freedom that comes with not caring what other people think and having trust in yourself, the trust that you know what you're doing and that to you this is fun. Gamification is what I love. If I see the journey of entrepreneurship as a game, then I'm constantly evolving. I'm trying to work out cheat codes. I'm trying to work out how to get to that next level and progress to the later levels of the game.
Yeah, I love that. What's the line? Don't worry about what everyone else thinks because they're not thinking about you at all.
Indeed. Why waste that energy?
I think that's where to end. That's a really, really beautiful thing, Simon. It's been a real pleasure chatting to you, and I really appreciate you making the time. People can find you online. I mean, your site, Simon Alexander Ong, is there anywhere to direct people particularly, or?
Yeah, I mean, I would say if you want to find out more or listen to more stuff that I share, then sign up to the newsletter at simonalexanderong.com, watch some of the YouTube videos. Otherwise, the platforms I'm most active on are LinkedIn and Instagram.
Beautiful. Thank you, Simon. So that was this week's episode of Business Without Bullshit. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Dee. It's ciao.